from today's gospel of Jesus in Jerusalem at the temple comes in the last week of Jesus' life. This is one of his final days on earth. This is during the Passion Week, so it's a little misplaced. It's something that really we should be looking at around Easter time, but I assume the people who put together the lectionary knew that in most churches this is when we did stewardship, and so they put this little story at this time of the year. Now, I would say this, that I think traditionally what people have mostly said is that you should be like the widow and just give out of, everything you have. And to be honest with you, I don't really think that that's what Jesus' point here is in the story. Because if we look at the beginning of the story, Jesus is telling his followers to beware of those who perform their religion. Right? And we see this in our own world today. We all know people who talk about Jesus and faith and Christianity who aren't really very kind, who aren't really very generous, who are very willing to accrue power to themselves and to shut out people and to shun people. Right? I don't like to pick on people particularly, but we've probably heard of Joel Osteen, right? The prosperity gospel guy who lives in like a $10 million house. And I see this on social media all the time, people complaining about people like Joel Osteen, about how they should tax the churches because they have all the money. And those pastors are just like living on the fat of all of the people. Now, that may be true in Joel Osteen's church, but do let me say that we do not have all of the money here. And I do not live in a very fancy house. Actually, the house I live in is owned by St. Luke's Church. And I have a used car, not a private jet. I'm pretty sure Jesus wants me to have a private jet. So if any of you would like to donate a private jet, I would really, really appreciate it. But in the meantime, I'm going to be driving my almost 10-year-old used car that I bought a year ago after my previous car caught on fire. It was just a little fire. It was fine. Anyway, so Jesus isn't here necessarily talking about, I don't think, how we give, so much as we need to be aware of people who would take advantage of our faith. Right? Because that's really what's happening to the widow, is that the widow is a woman of tremendous faith. She believes and she trusts God. She loves God with her whole heart, and she wants to contribute to the ministry of God's people by supporting the temple. And so she comes with her last 2 coins. All that she has in the world, she is willing to give because the people who lead the temple have told her that that's what she should do, is to give of her all. But in the meantime, as Jesus points out, that those people who are telling her and taking advantage of her faith, they don't live like that. They don't give of their all. They walk around in fine clothing and they sit at fine banquets, and they give only out of what they have left over. And so Jesus is trying to point out to them the difference between someone who actually lives faith and someone who is merely religious. And I think that's a challenge for us here as Christian people, is how do we truly live into our faith? When we talk about living into our faith, I do believe that the widow is an example. Because one of the things I've talked about is that in the life of faith, it's a thing that we do. It's not a set of things necessarily that we believe in, although there are beliefs associated with it. But what Jesus tells us over and over and over and over again is that what matters in the life of faith is what we do. That our actions are more important than anything else. And I've said before that if we wish to follow in Jesus' footsteps, if we want to be his people, we need to do the things that he did, right? And I usually lay out my 6 examples of we worship and we pray and we serve others and we study the scriptural story so we can recognize God at work. We practice Sabbath, we take time to reconnect. But we also practice generosity. And here the widow is an exemplar beyond compare, because she truly is someone who is generous. And in this time, I think this is something that we as Christian people need to really lean into. And I don't mean like just opening up your wallets. Although I hope that we're going to talk about stewardship, that you are willing to make a commitment to further the ministries of the church. But what I'm really talking about is generosity of spirit. Right? And I don't know if you've noticed, there's some tension in the air right now. There's fear. There's anger. There's disappointment. There's all sorts of feelings, strong feelings. And as Christian people, this is a time when we are called to practice generosity of spirit. And I don't mean like pretending that nothing is wrong. One of the things that Jesus does tell us is that we need to stand firm against whatever evil may come. But at the same time, Jesus commands us to look for Christ in our brothers and sisters. That there are two things that Jesus tells us we need to do. We remember the story of the rich young man who comes to Jesus and asks him. I think we just had this a couple weeks ago. And he says, "What must I do?" And he tells him to give away everything. But in another version of the story, he tells them, "Well, what are the commandments, And he says, to love God with your whole self and likewise to love your neighbor. Right? And so these are the two things, the only two things really that Jesus commands us in terms of living out our life of faith. To love God with our whole being, with our heart and our soul and our mind and our strength. And likewise to love our neighbor as ourself. That this is at the foundation of how we need to respond to a world that is filled with fear and anger. That we need to find a way to love and care for the world and to love and care for our neighbors. That this is the most important thing that we need to do. In the song we just sang, in the prayer of St. Francis, it says that we should seek not hearts that understand us, but hearts that we can understand. Because if we are to conquer this moment, it's important for us to remember that hate has never, ever been conquered by hate. That hate is only defeated by love. And love can be stern. It doesn't have to be gooey and soppy. But it means looking out for others, about wishing them the very best, the opportunity to thrive as much as they can, to live into their God-given capability and possibility. That we must stand firm in our willingness to be loving, to not respond to hate with hate, to not respond to fear with fear, to not respond to anger with anger, but always to respond with the love of Christ. Because one of the things we also know is that hate cannot stand against love. That fear cannot stand against love. That death itself cannot stand against love. That the life, death, resurrection of Jesus Christ shows us that the power of God is greater than all of these. And that nothing on this earth, nothing we can imagine, nothing beyond is greater than the love of God.